40 centimètres, c'est ça?
Pas du tout.
Non.
Ah non, c'est même... enfin,
Puis moi, à la place, je vous invite à vivre un truc extraordinaire.
Oh mon Dieu!
Ne vous inquiétez pas, j'ai l'habitude.
Vraiment?
Oui, c'est ma deuxième fois.
Je peux continuer ou pas?
A beautiful woman named Diane returned from work late. Suddenly she received a call on her home phone. A man with a pleasant voice introduced himself as Alexander. He said that he had found her cell phone. Diane's bathtub overflowed, so that she had to cut the conversation short. The next time, she had already received a call from Bruno, her ex-husband, who is also a lawyer. They could not stop communicating since they were work colleagues. They had a conflict of interest regarding a new case. Diane didn't want to hear anything about it, so she hung up and then called Alexander back. They started a nice conversation and agreed to meet tomorrow. When Diane asked how she would recognize him, Alexander assured her that she would not mistake him for anyone else. The next day, as arranged, Diane came to the cafe. When she saw that Alexander was a man of very short stature, she was speechless with shock, but tried to behave tactfully. After returning the phone to Diane, Alexander started flirting with her and joking. He is definitely the kind of person who knows how to laugh at himself. Diane relaxed very quickly. When Alexander offered her an adventure, she was skeptical at first, but the man was very persistent. Suddenly a beautiful woman came up to Alexander to say hello, which really surprised Diane. Alexander promised her adrenaline, and Diane decided to agree after all. It turned out that it was about a parachute jump. Diane was very frightened, because she had never done anything like that before. She and Alexander jumped off together. Diane was ecstatic, because it had been a long time since she had had such a vivid experience. She thanked Alexander for a pleasant pastime, and they agreed to meet again sometime. Upon arriving at his luxurious home, Alexander tried not to make any noise, but the huge dog still jumped on him in joy. All evening Diane couldn't stop smiling, thinking about tonight's adventure. Meanwhile, Alexander's son Benji told the father about his plans to launch an innovative app, but he needs a sponsor for that. Benji dreams of being invested by the well-known businessman who encourages young talented entrepreneurs. At work, Diane is arguing over the phone with Bruno about their client's divorce proceedings. Bruno intends to take the husband's side because he is rich, but Diane is principled and does not want to agree. Soon Bruno showed up at his ex-wife's office room and said that if they did not reach an agreement, they would have to stop cooperating. Diane doesn't want it to come to that and asked him for time to think about it. Meanwhile, Alexander, who is a highly paid architect, is busy with his projects. He received a call from Diane, who was feeling embarrassed. Alexander asked her to meet with him, and she gladly agreed. In the evening, Diane arrived at the appointed address. Alexander decided to show her the special place inside a ship. It was a cozy bar where everyone already knew Alexander. Diane felt very comfortable and relaxed in Alexander's company. She hadn't felt so good with anyone in a long time. Later he took her home. In a burst of emotion, Diane kissed him. After thanking Alexander for a pleasant evening, Diane went to her apartment. She smiled, realizing she was in love. Alexander felt the same way. The next day Diane told Bruno that she was not ready to accept his terms, because if they sided with that woman's husband, they would get a lot of money, but they would ruin their reputations. Bruno realized that the ex-wife had changed and suspected that she had a boyfriend. Coralie, the chatty secretary, confirmed his suspicions and told him that Diane's new man was named Alexander. Meanwhile, he played table tennis with the son, and then confessed that he was dating a woman. Benji was very happy for the father, though he couldn't help making jokes. At the end of the day, Bruno suggested that his ex-wife go out together, but she said she had plans of her own. Later she was met by Alexander. The couple had no idea that Bruno was watching them, who was shocked by what he saw. Diane and Alexander had fun together at the party and danced without being embarrassed by anyone or anything. When it was time to go home, Alexander invited his beloved to go to him. Diane didn't mind. The height difference made Diane feel a little strange, but they spent the night together. When she woke up in the morning, she found a romantic note from Alexander, who had already left for work. Diana cleaned herself up, had breakfast, and met with Benji. The boy told her that his parents had divorced 10 years ago, but that they were still friends. At work, Alexander kept smiling as he recalled the night he had spent with Diane. Meanwhile, outraged Bruno told Coralie that his ex-wife was dating a midget. Later, Coralie told Diane that Bruno now knew about her relationship with Alexander. This made Diane nervous. On the one hand, she is in love with Alexander, but on the other hand, she is very concerned about his height. All the casual bystanders are constantly looking at them. Diane decided to go first to her ex-husband, but tried not to show that she was nervous. He called her Snow White and made all sorts of hurtful hints about her relationship with Alexander. Diane wasn't going to put up with the insults and left. Meanwhile, Alexander, who was walking with his friend, was bumped into by a random passerby. The man mistook him for a child. Alexander was unhappy to hear this. Diane decided to give Alexander a gift and buy a sweater. However, the mall didn't have such small sizes, so she had to go to the children's section. On Benji's birthday, Alexander made an appointment for him to meet him at the airport. Alexander told the son that he had supposedly made arrangements with the very businessman who was sponsoring young talent. According to Alexander, he was willing to listen to Benji's ideas. The guy was overjoyed and prepared to present the project to his idol, not suspecting that in fact the father did not arrange any meeting with the businessman. In the evening, enthusiastic Benji told the father and Diane that the businessman had found his ideas interesting and had given him his telephone number. Benji was very grateful to the father, who with the help of cunning, had encouraged him to take the first step toward his dream. Diane was delighted with Alexander's action and gave him the gift. Alexander was very touched and embarrassed, because he was not used to receiving gifts. At work, one of his colleagues teased Alexander for his height. However, Alexander did not let himself be offended and responded to the insulter with dignity, causing the respect of the other colleagues. In the evening, he asked Diane to finally introduce him to her parents. Diane was confused, but promised to do so tomorrow. Diane's mother and stepfather were waiting for their daughter at the art show. They had no idea that someone else was about to join them. Nicole and the family friend were shocked when they realized the daughter was dating a midget. Later, the company continued socializing in the restaurant. Philippe, Diane's stepfather, who earns his money in stocks on the stock market, was deaf. That is why for him people's physical disabilities do not seem to be a hindrance to success. Noticing that the people at the neighboring tables were gossiping about them, Diane approached them and asked them to stop being so tactless. When Alexander, after receiving a work call, stepped away for a moment, Nicole began making jokes about his height. She thought he was cute, but the woman wondered why her daughter had chosen him. After dinner, Diane confessed to Alexander that it was not easy for her, but that she was trying her best. Things would be different with a normal man, but Diane is willing to work on herself for their happiness together. She did not expect Alexander to come to her work the next day. Diane doesn't want to let the beloved meet her ex-husband. Coralie was delighted with Alexander, who struck her with his charm. However, Diane could not hide her lover for long, as Bruno unceremoniously showed up at her office room. He was indignant that Diana was not making concessions to him. Without noticing Alexander, Bruno accidentally sat on him. That is how they met. Later, Diane and Bruno talk privately. The ex-husband is convinced that she is dating the midget out of desperation. After this conversation, Diane was very upset. Bruno was surprised when Alexander drove up to him in his luxury car and made it clear that Diane was now with him. Bruno was outraged by this antics and suggested that his rival solve the problem man-to-man. Passers-by thought Bruno was threatening the schoolboy, so they began to stand up for Alexander. To make Diane feel comfortable and finally calm down, Alexander invited Bruno to a party at his house. Bruno was so dumbfounded that he couldn't even refuse. Meanwhile, Diane told her mother that she loved Alexander. Nicole was so shocked by this statement that she almost provoked an accident. She doesn't understand how it came to this. Bruno did come to the party at Alexander's house. The man tried in every way to tease his rival, but he did not give in to his provocation. In the house, when Alexander tried to get napkins from the cabinet, he accidentally dropped a chair and hung. This was seen by Bruno, who wanted to call Diane to admire her new man. Alexander asked him not to do that. Bruno did make concessions to him, but promised that he would not leave it like that. Diane was surprised to see her ex-husband and her current lover chatting nicely. Meanwhile, Nicole told Philippe that she was against her daughter's relationship with an invalid. Upon hearing this, Philippe said that he was the one living with the invalid, not Diane. One day, when Alexander and Diane were out for a walk, the same saleswoman from whom she had bought the sweater allegedly for a child approached her. The saleswoman's 11-year-old son and Alexander had the same small-size sweater. The situation was awkward. In the evening, Diane looked very nervous. She honestly admitted to her beloved that she couldn't take it anymore. She doesn't want to break up with him, but pressure from her family and others are forcing her to do so. As Diane drove home, she cried, because she really loves Alexander. Just ridiculous stereotypes get in the way of their happiness. Alexander's condition was no better. The parting with the beloved had greatly affected him. Benji advised the father to forget Diane, because she wasn't worth his worries. But Alexander disagreed, for Diane had tried very hard. Alexander was very grateful to the son, who always didn't care how tall his father was. Diana was extremely surprised when Bruno made concessions to her and stated that in court they would defend his wife and not his client. However, Diana quickly realized that it wasn't a matter of generosity, just that Bruno was having an affair with this woman. She constantly thought about Alexander. He missed her very much too. One day Diane couldn't stand it and went to his house, but Benji opened the door for her. It turned out that Alexander had gone away on business. The situation was aggravated by Coralie, who said that all people are cruel, for they judge others by their appearances, and Diane is no exception. Suddenly Nicole came into the office room, apologized to the daughter and advised her to go to her beloved right away and make things right. Diana did just that. She was going to do a parachute jump and prove her love to Alexander. She jumped and landed right on the roof of the building Alexander was designing. Diane told him everything she felt and promised that from then on the opinions of others would mean nothing to her. From now on, they are free from stereotypes and will be together again.